was the fall of 2006, and Ford Motor Company was on the brink of bankruptcy. Saddled with sky-high cycle times, plummeting quality levels, and astronomical labor costs, the company's business model had become untenable. Unable to compete domestically or internationally, it had lost 25% of its market share over the last 15 years. But these failings most certainly weren't due to a lack of effort by the man in the top job. 44-year-old chairman and CEO Bill Ford had taken the reins 4 years earlier to try to save his great-grandfather's company. He was sharp, self-aware, and possessed a remarkable humility and work ethic. When he'd assumed his role in 2001, he'd promised that the company would hit $7 billion in profit in 5 years. But though he briefly got Ford back in the black that same year, by 2006, the company was facing its worst yearly loss in its history, almost $17 billion. The company's culture, which journalist Bryce Hoffman described so well in his book about Ford's turnaround, was broken. It was based on an entrenched careerist culture that resisted all change and put individual advancement ahead of corporate success. Executives plotted ways to undermine one another's efforts. On the factory floor, union bosses jealously defended their members' rich benefits and scoffed at attempts to boost productivity. After 5 years of Herculean efforts, during which he never took a salary, Bill Ford was finally forced to come face to face with the reality that he couldn't save his beloved company on his own, which he announced to the board. Although his successor is credited with one of the most impressive turnarounds in corporate history, it was Bill Ford's unflinching self-awareness that made it possible. Bill Ford's successor was Alan Mulally, an executive with a track record outside of the auto industry that included technical excellence, bottom-line results, and most importantly, dramatic turnarounds. Remember the story from his first employee in the first module? In his 37 years at Boeing Commercial, Mulally had not only saved the company from near bankruptcy in the aftermath of 9/11, he'd led their program to design the 777, a 5-year, $5 billion project that single-handedly propelled the organization ahead of its competition for years to come. From the moment he arrived at Ford's world headquarters in 2006, it was clear that Mulally was radically different from his predecessors. In an industry that can skew towards secrecy, and on a bad day, paranoia, he was open, approachable, and completely unpretentious. He ate in the employee cafeteria and greeted strangers with a hug or a pat on the back. But those who confused Mulally's agreeableness for weakness were quickly disabused of that notion. A friend of his once remarked, "Don't mistake Alan's smile for a lack of purpose or awareness. The man has a backbone of titanium." Mulally knew that the foundational challenge of Ford's turnaround would be to start transforming the company's secretive, change-resistant, siloed culture into a more open, collaborative, and transparent one. In his very first press conference as CEO, Mulally made it clear that under his leadership, the truth would be king. When asked what model of car he drove, he stunned reporters by saying, "A Lexus. It's the finest car in the world." One thing that was clear from the outset, if Mulally was going to transform his new company's culture, he had to start with his executive team. The first change he introduced was a weekly meeting to review the status of the business, which he called the Business Process Review, or BPR. The purpose of the BPR was what Mulally called awareness for everyone. It was meant to ensure that everybody knew the plan, the status of the plan, and the reality of the challenges the company was facing. The BPR would be held on the same day at the same time each week, Thursday mornings at 7 a.m., and it would be mandatory for all members of the executive team. They'd review 320 metrics on everything from vehicle launches to revenue streams to productivity. Each metric would be assigned a color: green if it was on track, yellow if it had potential problems, and red if it had definite ones. Each of Mulally's 9 executives would have 10 minutes to deliver a succinct report on their progress toward creating an exciting, viable, profitable, and growing Ford for the good of all stakeholders. Mulally emphasized that this meeting would be safe, that no one should hesitate to surface problems, and no one would be punished for telling the truth. There would be a learning curve, he told them, so if they didn't know something, that was okay. At the first BPR, Mullally's team had no idea what to expect. They took their seats at the large, round wooden conference table, and Mullally called the meeting to order. First, he repeated his vision: people working together as a lean global enterprise for automotive leadership. To get there, he reminded them everyone would have to be open about everything that was going on in their area of the business. He told them it was the only way he knew how to operate, and that everyone had to be involved and aware. Early BPRs took as many as 7 hours, but soon the team had settled into a rhythm. Unfortunately, however, the process still left a little something to be desired. Despite the fact that the company was at risk of extinction, every chart that every executive presented in every meeting was green. One week, Mullally decided he had had enough. He interrupted the meeting to remind his team that they were going to lose $17 billion that year, and yet all of the charts were green. No one said anything. Then Mullally asked if by any chance anyone thought there was something, even just one little thing that wasn't going well. The meeting room filled with a thick and itchy silence. Seats were shuffled in, throats were cleared, eyes darted towards patent leather shoes. The executives smelled danger. And they knew exactly what would happen to the first fool to show a red slide. The framed family portrait on their desk would be at the bottom of a cardboard box before lunch. They feared that the whole exercise was indeed a trick. Mullally told them, "We can't manage a secret. We have to tell each other what's really going on in the business." Yet again, seats were shuffled in, throats were cleared, and eyes darted towards shoes. The executives hadn't felt safe bringing up problems under the previous leadership, so why should this new hotshot CEO be any different? The days passed, and the drill remained the same. Green slides, and more green slides. One week, one of Mullally's executives, who was concerned that he might not hang on to his job under his new boss, made a monumental decision. He figured if he was going to go out, he might as well go out in a blaze of glory. Production on a new model he was in charge of had hit a major snag due to a mechanical issue, and the launch, which was just weeks away, had to be stopped. So with the fearlessness of a man who had nothing to lose, as he and his team prepared for the next day's BPR, he decided to list the product launch metric as red. He figured the best case scenario was that he'd get reamed out but keep his job. Worst case, he'd get reamed out and be shown the door. Never did it dawn on him that there was another possible outcome. That week's BPR began as it always did, with a veritable forest of green. Then it was the halted launch executive's turn. Up came the red slide, and boom, the air went out of the room. When he said the solution wasn't clear yet, as Mullally recalls, people thought, well, that's that. 2 large men are going to burst into the room, grab this guy, cart him off, and we'll never see him again. Instead, in the midst of that heaviest of silences came a surprising sound. Alan Mullally's exuberant applause, along with the exclamation of, "This is great visibility." Turning to his team, he asked them what could be done to help out. Right away, one of the executives suggested a solution, and they were off and running. Alan Mullally was sure this would be the BPR where everything changed. But the next week, to his great disappointment, what did he see? Green slides, and more green slides. But Mullally's team saw something that day that spoke volumes. When they entered the conference room, the executive was sitting right next to a smiling Mullally. Not only had he not been fired, he had actually been commended. This was evidently the final proof that Mullally's team needed. The following week, the decks they brought to the BPR were a glorious rainbow of yellows and reds. If there was a single defining moment in Ford's turnaround, Alan Mullally believes that this was it. Up until that point, he told me, Ford's executives had been afraid to surface problems, to tell each other the truth, to give and receive honest feedback. That same mentality that had kept them mum about the realities of the business also kept them mum about their individual failures, their team dysfunctions, and cultural challenges. But now, for the first time, the team was confronting reality. From that point forward, they were on the open road, no pun intended, to what Alan Mulally called awareness for everyone. As individuals, they understood expectations and were facing their limiting beliefs and behaviors. As a team, they knew the business environment, the plan, and the status of that plan. But it wasn't just the executive team who possessed this information. Everyone in the company was trusted and expected to know the direction, the role they played, and how things were going. This information also flowed to their stakeholders outside of the organization, their customers, investors, dealers, suppliers, and even the public. The results speak for themselves. By 2009, in the midst of the biggest economic crisis since the Great Depression, Ford was back in the black. It was the only one of the big three American car makers who didn't take a cent of taxpayer bailout money. By 2011, their profit had swelled to more than $20 billion. It was their second most profitable year in history. If being individually self-aware means understanding who you are and how others see you, a self-aware team commits to that same understanding at a collective level. More specifically, there are 5 things that self-aware teams regularly assess and address. I call them the 5 cornerstones of collective insight. First, their objectives. What are they trying to achieve? Second, their progress towards those objectives. How are they doing? Third, the processes they're employing to achieve their objectives. How are they getting there? Fourth, their assumptions about the business and their environment. Do they hold true? And finally, their individual contributions. What impact is each team member having on the team's performance? As a result of their collective insight, self-aware teams are more efficient, more effective, more innovative, and more rewarding to be a part of. You can download a checklist of the 5 cornerstones below. Unfortunately, as many can attest and studies often show, few teams are naturally self-aware. It's hard enough to cultivate your own self-awareness without the added challenge of those pesky peer relationships. While your boss is theoretically required to tell you the truth once a year in your performance appraisal, your teammates have no such obligations. Though the people who work alongside us every day are often the ones with the most critical information about how we're doing, they're usually the most likely to stay mum. This constant ambiguity doesn't just sap our confidence and stoke our paranoia. It can also be damaging, even fatal, to the team's collective success. Though leaders should take their team's tentativeness to tell the truth seriously, they needn't be disheartened by it. With the right approach and a true ongoing commitment, you can foster a culture that encourages communication and feedback at all levels, one where honesty trumps hierarchy, and even the lowest ranking member feels safe putting problems on the table. Specifically, we've discovered 3 building blocks that must be in place for a leader to create a self-aware team. First, if the team doesn't have a leader who models the way, the process will be seen as insincere or even dangerous. Second, if there isn't the safety and expectation to tell the truth, the chance of candid feedback is almost zero. Third, you need an ongoing process, not unlike Alan Mulally's BPR, to ensure that the exchange of feedback isn't just a one-time thing, but rather is built into the team's culture.